Folks, today I've got a very special guest, but you may not know the name Campbell McLaren. But the one big thing that you may be familiar with is UFC. So Campbell is what do we call you? You are the
Co-creator of the
co-creator.
UFC.
Yeah, you were really involved heavily at the very beginning of this, and you were the person that really launched the career of UFC. I mean, you were there at the height of the biggest. I hate to say the biggest fighters, but you were there when in the infancy, and we all got hooked. Especially if you're over the age of 50, you definitely know the older guys that were fighting. Campbell, welcome.
Chuck, thank you. It's great to be here. Your reputation precedes you. People know who you are, and I think the focus of your discussions have always been very interesting. People's struggle, and entrepreneurship, and so many things that I'm quite familiar with. So good to be here. I like how you described the UFC, when I launched it, it was called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. We went to UFC a little bit later to sound more like the NFL. But originally it was Ultimate Fighting Championship, and I executive produced the first 12 episodes, helped create the Octagon, hired Joe Rogan, hired the legendary matchmaker Joe Silva. If you're hardcore, you know who Silva is. He was my assistant. Brought in the Gracies, got the show on Friends. Some of you may know Jon Favreau, the actor and director, fought Tank Abbott in the Friends episode. I'm featured in Mad Magazine as the promoter. I was the cover story of Mad Magazine. So we did a lot back in those early days to launch the franchise. As you said, SEG, which was a division of the German media company Bertelsmann, BMG was the record label, and SEG was the pay-per-view division. And, it was a phenomenon. And people say, what was the controversy about? Well, it was about what I said. I said it was banned in 49 states. No, Chuck, nobody ever said, what was the one state you're allowed to do it? Nobody ever asked me that, and I literally made it up. We weren't banned anywhere. We did become, it became pretty controversial. But, we started banned in 49 states, which is impressive if you think about it for a program that had never been seen, done, or heard of before. So we came out of the gate banned. So that was kind of fun. But those early days were very wild. And I think that clearly what Dana White and later, Ari Emanuel and everyone has done with the UFC, they've turned it into this giant global enterprise. And it's worth, TKO is a publicly held company now, and they own WWE, UFC. They've just launched Zuffa Boxing. They have slap fighting. So it's a giant mega enterprise. However, I will say in the first 12 UFCs, in terms of a reach in that era, no internet, I think we were as popular, if not more popular than it is currently, because it was so new and it was so different, and it was so like the mid 90s, the 80s were, hair bands like Flock of Seagulls, and WWE was in the WWF. If anyone remembers, it was WWF, was in its suck it era, and everything was so stupid and overblown. And then if you're a music fan, the the grunge sound came in, Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, that kind of blew away the record business. I launched the UFC. A good friend of mine named Paul Heyman launched ECW, which was the wilder version of WWF based on the UFC. And it was that mid 90s era where everything got real. And the UFC was a big part of getting everything real.
Well, I do remember specifically getting a call from a female friend that said, "Have you heard about the Ultimate Fighting Championship? There are no rules. These guys are in the cage. They're fighting. Come on over. You got to see it." And that was fight number 4. I can't remember who it was, but it was.
I should know that. 4 was that Charlotte, North Carolina, the first one we went to? They run together. I don't have my notes in front of me, Chuck, but if you came in at 4, that's pretty impressive because I think that would have been 1995.
Yeah, and it's
So
all
you
because
were
of the
on
fight.
early.
Yeah, yeah. I do want to ask a couple things, and I will say this up front that it's no wonder why ESPN, later ranked you as among the biggest personality, the biggest promoters out there, because you are this larger than life figure that launched the career of Ultimate Fighting Championship, and like I said, now
But
later
yep,
being
I'm
called
gonna
UFC.
swing this around. Let me see if we can we. I can't get it. Manny Yarbo, he's larger than life. He's the sumo I used at 6'6", 680 pounds.
Incredible.
This is my nascent studio. On a personal note, my wife and I have had our first grandchild, Campbell David McLaren III, and we've moved out here to San Francisco. My wife asked me at the beginning of the year, she said, "Where do you want to live?" And I said, Miami or Paris. And she said, "Wrong answer. We have a grandchild in San Francisco." So the moving truck came, and before I knew it, I was out here. The truck left a week ago today.
Wow.
So I haven't figured out. You're inaugurating my new office studio space, but it's not quite. It's not 100% there yet, but it's airborne. Here we are, so it's airborne.
And I want to ask you about that a little bit later in our conversation because you have a podcast that'll be launching on June 12th, I believe.
Right.
So we'll talk about that. But the other thing that you mentioned is Joe Rogan came in. You brought him in on the infancy. Was there a reason you brought him in? Did you
Oh,
know that he'd
absolutely.
become this big star?
Absolutely. I had my podcast launched Thursday, June 12th, which is next week, and I'm sure this will continue to air. So we're going to do 2 episodes a week, uh, based on the first 12 UFCs, and it's called No Rules with Campbell McLaren, and it really is going to follow the arc. A cultural arc, a sports arc, a business arc of banned in 49 states to on the White House lawn. And regardless of your politics, whether you like President Trump, don't like President Trump, don't care, what it doesn't matter, to have a sport being played on the lawn of the White House when within many memories, yours included, it was very controversial and very banned. Think about it. If you had Admiral Abner Doubleday or Dr. Naismith, Doubleday codified the baseball rules, and Naismith invented basketball. I mean, it's not often you get the founders of a sport that has become this big to be alive, right, and to be
Yeah.
in the media, right? Because we're used to sports. Baseball's first reference is in inner city Boston in the 18th century, 1740. They banned baseball because too many windows are being broken, and of course. Walt Whitman, the poet, was a baseball correspondent. So in the Civil War, so sports. We think of sports as always being around. Here's a sport that is 33 years old. All right. So
Mhm.
not only are the founders here, but the original athletes are here. And for it to have gone so quickly to prominence, to be invited to perform on the White House lawn, I'm blown away by that. Right. And it's not about politics, it's about a cultural change
Yeah.
where we've taken this property that was this sport, this enterprise that was considered outlaw, and it's come to represent aspects of our culture and aspects of the world and aspects of the US, so much so that the president invited it. And I think, is it his birthday? I think it's for
It
his
is.
birthday, right? So, that's pretty amazing. Now, like it, don't like it, it's on the White House lawn.
I want to touch on that a little bit more because combat sports, it seems like it's always been a balance of athletic competition with some spectacle in there. So, do you think an event like this Combat 250 um, is the future of attracting new audiences, having this spectacle? So, is this really more, has the spectacle overshadowed the sport itself? Put you on that spot there.
That's a good that is a really that's a really smart question. Usually I can go, hey, here's the answer. Da, 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 da. I got to think about that for a sec. Now, I always saw it as a spectacle. In fact,
Mhm.
I'm often taunted by a quote I made. I said, if this turns into a sport, it'll be the worst thing that happens to it. Um, no, the spectacle is built in. And look, it's the Super Bowl's a spectacle. Right? I
Yes.
mean, sometimes the Super Bowl, the games themselves are not that great, right? I mean, but it is a spectacle, and we all watch. And when Jack Dempsey fought Firpo in Yankee Stadium, and whatever Yankee Stadium held at that time, 50,000 people. I mean, that was a spectacle.
Yeah.
And I think the recent Jake Paul Mike Tyson event was a spectacle. So number one, there's nothing wrong with a spectacle. All right, it's we like it.
Okay.
We've always liked, the circus. We like the circus, whatever form. I use the circus loosely. I think Jake Paul, Mike Tyson was the circus. So is it a spectacle? Yes, absolutely. Is that a bad thing? No, absolutely not. I think that you take fighters. You mentioned the old days. So Tank Abbott was a huge star back in the day. And I don't know if he had a winning record or not. It almost didn't matter because he was part of the spectacle. The Diaz
Right.
brothers, and to an extent, Conor McGregor in the UFC. I mean, Conor left the UFC with a shattered leg, and much talk about whether he'd ever compete again. But he's still the biggest star because it's about the spectacle. Muhammad Ali is maybe an example and maybe not because he got spectacle, right? Even more than Don King did. He got it. But he was
Hmm.
also a tremendous athlete. But his renown comes from his ability to promote himself and be a spectacle. When he walked down 125th Street or when he showed up in Louisville or wherever he went, with the rhymes and the poetry, and that amazing smile, and and he was a very handsome guy and just charismatic. So the spectacle is always part of sport. I don't
Okay.
think there's a sport that doesn't want to be a spectacle. Just not all of them have the chops to pull it off, right? I like two sports. My wife says I like the sport I created, which is true, and I like baseball. And what I like about baseball is the old saying, it's 3 minutes of excitement crammed into 3 hours, right?
Right.
So, with combat sports, what we've seen in clipping and highlight reels and so on, you may put on a spectacle. It may be the one night spectacle, right? And however many people you attract in the live aspect. But then combat sports, one of the reasons it's so popular on YouTube, I think soccer is the most popular sport. Then I think it's basketball, and then it's combat sports. Is the clips are so great. So
Hmm.
nowadays you have to balance. There's the spectacle, and then there's the clipping, right? And combat sports delivers on both. And I think that's and some people say music is the universal language. Some people say love is the universal language. I like to believe violence is the international language because we all get it. We all like knockouts.
Yeah. Well,
We just do.
we do car wrecks, in
Yes.
motorsports, all of that. But with you saying this, you are that promoter person who really has you've paid close attention to how fans consume combat sports. So, do you think on this particular event that's coming up that fans or people are tuning in for the fight itself, or for the history of the venue, or the fact that it's so unprecedented of an event?
All of the above, Chuck.
All of the
Look,
above.
they've got some great athletes on there. It's comical how on the country's 250th anniversary, there's not a lot. It's not all Americans on that show on the White House lawn, and I don't know if that's the message the president wanted to send, but I think it's a great message. Like I believe the strength of the U.S., the strength of our country is in its mix and
Yeah.
in all the different cultures, nationalities, and ethnicities that have added to the great American call it dream. Look, I'm an immigrant. You said I came over from Scotland. If you ask, whether it's make America great again or whatever you believe, but if you ask an immigrant, they think America's pretty great now. I mean, this country gave me ability to make money, provide for my family, a great education. And as my dad said, no one is here because it was going good back home. So I think, the U.S. has provided safe haven, economic opportunity, personal freedom to many, many people. And that is whether that's the message that the UFC is conveying at the White House lawn, but that was my takeaway. Are people going to tune in? Yeah, of course they're going to tune in. It's everywhere. Are they tuning in for the sport or the spectacle? I think probably more the spectacle. I mean, don't you want to see what a fight looks like on the White House lawn? I mean, come on.
I I want to see that giant arch of a thing, and right,
Yeah,
I want to see the fight on the
yeah,
White House lawn
yeah, of
because
course.
it may not happen too many more times.
Yeah, yeah, no, this may be a one and done. We'll see, I guess.
Exactly. Campbell, if you don't mind, I'm going to reel it all the way back to the beginning of the Ultimate Fighting Championship concept in what, like '93, that early era. I want to ask you, did you genuinely believe that it could become this multi-billion-dollar global sport, or was this something that you thought, yeah, it's going to get a good reach, but not that far a reach?
No, no, no. Since I said, becoming a sport wouldn't be good for it. I can't say I thought it was going to
Mhm.
be a global sport. I knew it was going to be a huge hit. So I started working on this February, 33 years ago. I went out to meet Horion Gracie, famous Gracie family, and saw them in action. And they wanted to fight. Horion wanted to fight Mike Tyson, and Mike Tyson back then, he wasn't a boxer; he was a killer. He was an assassin. And I thought these guys are out of their mind, but this seems pretty interesting. So, no, I knew it was going to be a huge hit. There was no doubt about it. There was a game, still is, Mortal Kombat. And I thought this could be a real life version of Mortal Kombat. And as I, was showing, the Gracie family made Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in action. It was a series of VHS instructional tapes. And when you saw those, and the fact that Horion wanted to fight Mike Tyson and his father had wanted to fight Joe Louis,
Mm.
it made me think this was really the real deal. And again, you've got to put this in perspective. In the 1990s, it was a very different era. America had zero problems. There were, Osama bin Laden was long away. I guess the biggest problem was Monica Lewinsky and the scandal that brought to the White House, right? But
Mhm.
generally, it was the economy was good. It was smooth going. In fact, Tipper Gore, who was the vice president Al Gore's wife, had started a campaign to ban rap lyrics or put a label, right? So,
Oh,
and
yes.
video games were controversial. So it was a very different America. So when when the UFC burst on the scene, it did change. It got people's focus. It was pretty obvious it was going to be a big hit. It was fun. It had a bunch of characters. Everyone wore their own, gear. Back then, it was not MMA. It was not mixed martial arts. It was
Mhm.
art versus art. So you had a sumo fight a kickboxer, a jujitsu guy fight a boxer. It's a few events before people start to realize they're going to have to do a version of jiu-jitsu and a version of boxing and a version of Muay Thai, and they start to get mixed, I think, on UFC 7. So it looked different. It felt different. I knew that was it was. I had a videotape from Horion after I met, and Horion Gracie is the scion, the patriarch, the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu dynasty legacy.
Hmm.
And through him, I met Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had a great impact on the early UFC. Mel Gibson, Leo DiCaprio. They had a real Hollywood following, and um, he sent me this tape, and it was a home video, VHS home video of the family at the beach in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, right? And Horion is narrating this tape. It was hilarious. Chuck, it was the greatest thing. I wish I still had a copy. And he's narrating, he's holding the camera, right? So it's shaky and the wind is, it's Rio, it's on the beach. And he goes, over there, great Brazilian accent. I can't do accents, but I sort of can do Horion. Spent so much time with him. So he goes, over there is a man who has insulted the Gracie family. We have decided to teach him a lesson. We send our youngest, smallest cousin to teach him a lesson. And this skinny, like 14-year-old gets up. And I forget, they all have the R name because Elio Gracie thought that was a lucky letter. So it's Hoyson, Hickson, Hoyler. Who am I forgetting? Horion. They all have. So whichever, and it might have been Hoyler, gets up and walks across the beach. And there's this big guy sitting with his girlfriend. And he just starts kicking sand on him. And the guy stands up and takes off his shirt. Oh, he's this giant guy, like a weightlifter, muscle, a bodybuilder type guy. And the little cousin shoots in, takes him to the ground, rolls him over, chokes him unconscious, rolls him over again, boom, punches him right in the face, breaks his nose. And then Oda goes, "This is what happens if you insult the Gracie family." and so I'm showing this video in my office on at SEG BMG, and like a crowd is gathering in my office to see this, and that I knew it was going to be a huge hit. So I went out when I went out to meet Horion's crew, and they were raising a little bit of money to get the first one going, because at that time they did own 50% of that was the deal I did, and they were bought out later. But I promised them 3 shows. And I promised their investors 3 shows because I knew we would do 3, And the first one, we did like 80,000 buys, which put that in perspective. And then the second one did 300,000 buys. But the first one, with no marketing, only mine, no rules, all that nonsense, there was 1/5 of the universe, the pay-per-view universe that there is now. So 100 million pay-per-view homes now, 20 million pay-per-view homes back then, right? And you may remember, most won't, that you had to go to your cable operator and get a box. I mean, you had to go get it and then, show your credit card and then come home and hook that up to get the pay-per-view. It was ridiculous. Now, like, you point your phone at it or you lift your thumb in the air or whatever it is, it's so much easier, but you had to literally go get the box. So to do that sort of number on a unmarketed, marketing was really the publicity I generated. And with an unknown property in 1/5 of the current universe, the fact that we did that big a number is pretty amazing. So, so that was it. And it was the controversy. Let me, I want to go, you can rein me in and you can point me in a direction, but, I know how to talk. Because
Yes.
people often go, "Were you a fighter?" No, I'm a talker. But I'm pretty good at it. Anyway, so you'd asked me about Joe Rogan. So I had lunch with his manager 2 weeks ago, my dear friend Jeff Sussman, and I knew Jeff, and I'd been in the comedy business. I had managed Larry David for a little while. I managed Joy Behar, who's on The View. And then I ran a very famous comedy club in New York called Caroline's, where it was Howie Mandel and Jerry Seinfeld and Robin Williams. And, that's who I work with there. So I had a pretty good eye for talent. Joe was a comedian. He was
Hmm.
he was a comedian. He was on a show called News Radio, a sitcom, and this was before what was the show? Not Truth or Dare. I'm blanking on the name. Where he hosted the show and he made people eat bugs or get in a cave. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
blanking too.
and
Good. Okay.
I am too. Fear
Yeah.
Factor.
Fear Factor. So this is before Fear Factor. And we were having the first 12, like we didn't know, like, no one had done this before. So we didn't know how things were going to roll out. Like when we had fighters come in, we did the tournament, right? So it's an 8-man, 1-night tournament, and you have to advance through 3 fights to win. So often after the first round, like guys are hurt and can't proceed, right? And so we didn't know what to do. So if we just put in a new fighter on the second round, you're giving the fighter a bye, right? So that's kind of like very unfair. So this is one of the ideas we had once. We'll take the fighters that are going in on the second round that haven't fought yet, and we'll hold them, and someone will beat them up a little bit, and then we'll put them in. Like that was the kind like what do you do, right? Like
That's the
that was the
bullfight.
best idea we had. Anyway, so stuff often went wrong, and Rogan was master at dealing with hecklers and working the audience and ad lib comedy, right? And so I knew if I brought him in, he would be able to handle, like, Joe, we need 15 minutes. Go talk to them about how great it's been so far. I knew he could do that, right? Now, I'll unveil this here, Chuck. I was going to talk about this on the podcast, but you're going to get the, I don't know, whatever it's called, sneak peek, whatever. So the first Joe Rogan was Brian Kilmeade, who is the host of Fox and Friends now. And he introduced me to Jim Brown, who was the famous football player that was a commentator. And, Brian was very good, but he was very straight sports. And the geniuses at BMG they didn't get why he was playing it straight when we were doing this apocalyptic, version of whatever it was. And, they wanted rid of Brian. And I like Brian very much. And, I still talk to him. I've been on his show. But it was, I hated getting rid of him, and I was under duress. Oh, that's another thing. Like, people say, why did you sell the UFC for $2 million? I didn't. I was an employee at this company. Bertelsmann's one of the biggest media companies in the world. And it was the last job I ever had. It was the last time I was ever an employee. Because after I left, after I was invited to leave, because of the controversy and everyone thought I was the lightning rod, I realized I had no control over something that, to a great extent, I had created. Certainly, Horeon was the jiu-jitsu part. Certainly, Art Davey was the marketing representative for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. But I put it on TV. I convinced everyone to do it. I did no rules. I did banned in 49 states. I did, the logo and all that kind of stuff. Here is, my studio's not set up yet. Is this...
Wow.
Can we see that?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So that logo, we had nothing to work with. So a lot of the UFC, the creative for the UFC, the octagon, that logo, there are no rules. That was really my creative work. But I was an employee. So I didn't own the UFC. Right? I worked there. Everything I created, the company owned. So that was the last time. So when say, why did you sell it for $2 million? I wouldn't have sold it. I would have hibernated it. I would have figured out a way to placate Senator John McCain, and I would have come back in stronger. But That's not how those geniuses were thinking. I mean, they're the type of folks that got rid of Brian Kilmeade, who's a great talent. Anyway, so Brian Kilmeade's the first Joe Rogan. So that's kind of interesting if you think about it. And going back to those early days, again, I emphasize we didn't know what we were doing. and that's just the truth. So, I mean, you could ask when your questions are really good. But I don't want to say making it up as we went along, but we sort of
But
were.
you kind of were.
I mean, if nobody's done it before, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, you've got to forge that path. You're making it up as you go.
look, and then and I'm going to talk about this in much more detail on my podcast, how we actually created it, who was involved, what did Arnold Schwarzenegger do? I mean, because he really did a major part of this, and so did Van Damme, and and it was very interesting. But the first fight, UFC one, is Taylor Tooley versus Gerard Gordeau, and it lasted 27 seconds. And I was thinking, that's 7 fights tonight. That's 3.5 minutes of fighting. If they all go like that, we're in a 3-hour block. What am I going to do for the 2 hours and 56 minutes that we don't have fighting? It was going to make baseball look fast. So yeah, I mean, you live and learn. After we did, I'll tell you, here's a huge difference. UFC one, we couldn't. It was hard. Art Davey got most of the fighters. I helped get the boxer King Arthur Jimerson, Art Jimerson, by promising him $25,000 as a down payment on the house he wanted to buy in St. Louis. Right. So that was my contribution. So it was hard to get fighters because we'd explain it, and not Hoyce. Hoyce and Horion knew what was going on, so they were in. I gave Art Jimerson $25K. He was in. Everybody else was like, "Wait a minute, what? In a cage with no rules? Is that legal? What?" That's what Chuck Norris said. Is that even legal? So by UFC two, people were calling us. By UFC 3, people were coming to my office on 57th Street in New York unannounced to try out for the UFC. So, number one, no one had any idea. Number two, very popular. Number three, through the roof popular. So, and that was our learning curve, right? We'd started to figure it out.
Campbell, can you let everybody know again your podcast that you're going to be launching that's coming up here? This is, of course, 2026, but you're launching it on June 12th, 2026. Give us the lowdown again on your podcast.
All right. So Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, you should check it out. It's called No Rules with Campbell McLaren. We're going to do 24 episodes covering the arc from there's a prelude. So I guess I'm doing 25 episodes covering the initial idea of the UFC through UFC 1 and then to 12. And the reason we're doing a dozen, because it's a great number. Everybody likes a dozen. And so it's really, it was a baker's dozen. When you bought 12, you got an extra one. So I guess my prelude is the baker's dozen. But those are the 12 UFCs that I hands-on executive produced. After 12, the controversy was really getting intense, and a lot of people sort of focused on me. I did an interview with the New York Times that they labeled "Death is Cheap" $14.95, which was the price of the pay-per-view. So I was really encouraged to take a back seat after 12. I did work on through 22, but the 1 through 12 are really, my creative product. And, so I know every aspect of those, and blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of fun too. But so the podcast, There Are No Rules with Campbell McLaren, that's the famous controversial marketing campaign. There was a rules meeting at UFC 1, so there never was no rules. But that sounds better than some rules. There are some rules. Nobody's going to watch that, but
Yeah,
there are no rules. You're coming to that party. So we cover the no rules era of the UFC when it was owned by Bertelsmann, the giant media company, prior to Ari Emanuel, prior to Dana White, prior to the Fertitas. And both Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta were very helpful in when I launched Combate Global, which we haven't talked about yet, but that's the current
right.
promotion I work on. So the podcast, There Are No Rules with Campbell McLaren, 25 episodes covering really the inception, conception, and development and birth of the UFC. And I think much as the sport has evolved, because it certainly has. However, it is the octagon that I helped create. Joe Rogan is still there. The legendary
Mhm.
matchmaker Joe Silva certainly put his imprint on how the matchmaking is done. Leo DiCaprio is still a fan. I remember I sat when I went to the 20th anniversary, I was in the first row. Leo was behind me. And I don't want to act like Leo and I are pals, but he did know who I was.
Yeah.
And he was going like, how the fuck did you get in front of me? Like I'm, you know. So
Um,
we're going to talk about all that stuff. What did he do? What did Van Damme do? Some of the other people again, Brian Kilmeade. Like, there's a great saying: "Success has many fathers, but failure's an orphan." So there are a lot of people that contributed to the success of the UFC. I mean, it wasn't obviously Horion. So it wasn't just me, but as a TV producer, I think I legitimately can claim credit for getting it on the air and making it as popular to viewers as I did. Um,
yeah.
you know,
I encourage people who are watching, listening right now, definitely to tune into your podcast. But you did
thank you.
mention Combate Americas, which I think initially launched as Combate Global, but
No, you
Combate
got it.
America.
You were going in the right direction. Yeah, it's
Oh,
now Combate
oh,
Global. We launched as
mhm.
Combate Americas. Uh,
2011,
yeah,
2011.
and we do. It's very different than the UFC. Even though it's the same sport and it's the same rules, but we say our MMA is much more action.
Hmm.
Combate Global was started to really give opportunity to the great number of Hispanic combat
Yeah,
sports athletes that honestly were being overlooked by the UFC. And we put this together, and I saw quickly when I started the UFC, it was literally with grapplers, right? Jiu-jitsu, it's a grappling sport. And then later on, I brought in the big wrestlers, Dan Severn, Mark Kerr, Mark Coleman, and so on. And so UFC was a grappling based sport where the grapplers learned how to strike. So ground and pound was because the wrestlers could hold you down, but they didn't have a closing move because wrestling is, you pin someone, right? So they would hold you down and beat the crap out of you. So that's became known as ground and pound. I flipped the script with Combate and I found strikers, boxers, Muay Thai, Taekwondo. Taekwondo is very popular in Mexico. So I found strikers and we encouraged them to learn grappling. So it's much more stand up. The Combate athletes use jujitsu and any other ground form as defensive rather than offensive. So
okay.
if you like, we have more knockouts, we have more second round finishes. It's much. And look, there's three groups of athletes in MMA. The best combat sports athletes in the world are 25 to 35 years old are signed to the UFC. That's not a debate. That's a reality. There's a couple that aren't. But you want the best 25 to 35-year-old combat sports athletes. That's the UFC. Now, there's a group that gets thrown out, pushed out, aged out, and they go to other organizations. there was an organization called Bellator that I used to say was the retirement home of the UFC. So the UFC, older, whatever, pushed out, thrown out athletes. Or what we do is very much like what football, soccer teams do. We find very young athletes, and we don't sign anyone under 18, but we're aware of them very early on. We have a great scouting process. So my fighters, whether they're from the U.S., don't forget 65 million U.S. Hispanics, 40% of the state of California, 40% of the state of Texas. So I have a big American audience, and it's not just Hispanics, but we do focus on that group. And the rest of the Americas, Spanish is the second most spoken language in the world. Cantonese is first, English is third. So I found this group of folks. So I'll bring in a young fighter from Chile, and like the UFC did one event and never came back many years ago. So this young man or woman coming in from Chile is fighting for their flag, because we do country versus country. Their abuela, their granny, is watching, right? And so it's national pride. They're 19 years old. I'm paying them $10,000, which is more than half a year's salary in Chile. And this is the biggest opportunity. I bring them to LA, Hollywood. And so they fight like their hair's on fire. Like, if you like basketball, the difference between college basketball and NBA is significant, right? Like, typically, college, you play as soon as your feet touch wood, right? And then the NBA, the guys hold back until late in the season, late in the game. So my fighters are like college basketball. They come out swinging. And it just makes for a very active style of MMA. It is fun to watch. These young fighters put everything on the line. And of course, I didn't start this to be a feeder league for the UFC, but a number of our fighters, particularly David Martinez, looks like he's on his way to the 135 championship at the UFC. So we have, and I have, a very close relationship with Hunter Campbell at the UFC, and Dana. Dana's hard to talk to these days because he's the White House. He talks to the president.
Right.
He's got the president on speed dial. Again, so Combate is great. It's on Samsung TV. It's on Estrella TV, which is a Spanish TV network. Last year, our TV ratings, three times we beat the UFC. We regularly beat the UFC in Mexico. We've got a great and active show. We currently are on a World Cup break because,
Yes.
it's in the Spanish-speaking world and in U.S. Hispanics and many others, World Cup. Ooh, in Mexico, they often, if the game's on like at 2 p.m, they'll shut the office at 1 o'clock because nobody's going to work anyway, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this country, it's a strange, my goal with Combate was to be the number 2 sport for global Hispanics. And you don't even have to say what the number 1 is, right?
Right.
Our country is very blessed, very rich, a lot going on. We have football, baseball, hockey, basketball, what we call soccer, NASCAR, college versions of many of those sports, right? But around the world, some countries, it's just soccer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they might have rugby too, certainly boxing in places. But this is a rich country. We're rich in our sports offerings as well. I wanted to make Combate the number 2 sport globally. So we're getting there.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the stations that they could find Combate Global, because I think for 2026 you had like 20 live events already scheduled, and
We've done
you're
7, I think.
in major partnership with Estrella TV and expanding into digital distribution. And I want to ask you a little bit about that digital distribution because YouTube is not becoming, I mean, it's huge. Is there a push towards live sports programming or anything like that you're really eyeing and looking at?
Your questions are very good. And by very good, I mean I can't just go, yes. right. Like I actually have to have a coherent response. Absolutely is the answer. We tried something in the last two shows we did on YouTube. We go live on YouTube. We went live in English, and up until now, and we built up organically. We haven't spent any money on YouTube. There, some organizations have spent small fortunes to build audiences. We just did it organically, which is hard to do on social media platforms because they want you to support by spending money. So we got about 600,000 or 700,000 subscribers on YouTube, organic. Which, if you know the medium, you're going to go, wow. If you don't know the medium, you'll go 700,000. So Jake Paul has 70 million. But we did it organically. So the last two shows live on YouTube, we did in English. And you have to understand, if we're going for a Hispanic audience, and outside of the U.S., they speak Spanish. Mexico, it's Spanish. They speak Spanish in Mexico. They speak Spanish in Colombia. They speak Spanish in Chile. We did it in English, and great response. And I think it's because, like, if you are a football fan and you watch the English Premier League, you want to hear the guys go, and it's a goal, and I don't know what he was thinking about there. You know, you want the English commentators because it seems like a natural part of the sport. And I think MMA, UFC, Combate, we're American. We may be doing it in Spanish. By the way, the Super Bowl had a Spanish language halftime show in case you were under a rock on a different planet or something you hadn't heard. So I think, now America is very comfortable. I don't think Hispanic culture is niche anymore. I think it's really become the mainstream. Reggaeton is, I believe, the number one downloaded type of music in the world. So I don't think language matters. I think culture matters. And we're a youth culture. We're an action culture. We're a cool culture. We're, much more action MMA. And I don't want to say it doesn't matter what language we do it in, but boy, it doesn't seem to matter. I mean, we did really well in English in Mexico, and now our Samsung TV channel in Mexico is in Spanish, and that's where we outrate the UFC, right? Like
Okay.
the ratings really are spectacular on Samsung TV in Spanish. But we did our global YouTube broadcast in English the last two shows, and it was great. So you're going to have to get someone on smarter than me to explain what's going on culturally and, the mix. Get some sociology professor. They'll bore everybody to death, but they might be able to have a little understanding that I'm trying to get.
Well, I think you hit it at the very beginning when you were talking about, everybody's looking for that, I'll just say the kill spot or the kill.
Yeah. Yeah.
The crash or the fight, knockout. That's universal. You see it happen, bam. We know what happened.
Much more action, mucho más acción. We want it. Look, Horion is a friend. Horion Gracie is a friend. Hoist Gracie will be on my first episode of the podcast. And a very famous action director, Christian Gudekast, who did the London Falling series and Den of Thieves, and actually studied Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Rio since he was 6 years old, knows the family. So those are my first two guests. And, as you get into it, Jiu-Jitsu is an incredible sport, but a Jiu-Jitsu competition sometimes looks like a chess match to me. And some people describe it as physical chess, and it's a great sport, and it's a very effective martial art. But as you say, I want to see elbows, fists, head kicks, a little jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So anyway, oh my God, I hope Hoist doesn't hear that. He knows what I think.
Campbell, my last question for you, then I'll let you just take over. Or if you said, you know what, I've given enough, we could go with that. But I want to know, since you've worked around so many fighters, promoters, celebrities, television executives, and, billion-dollar business people, who is the person that you've worked with that is the most misunderstood? Don't include
Oh,
yourself.
oh man, your questions. The most misunderstood.
And we don't want to get you in trouble either.
Oh man, are you kidding? No rules. I have lived in trouble. It's um well, I good question, but I think I have an easy answer. So it's a good question, but I don't think it's a difficult question. I think that's Joe Rogan.
Oh,
Because he has been uh, from left wing media been tarred and feathered as the voice of President Trump. And
mm-hmm.
I know Joe, whatever it is now, 35 years, right? And he had Bernie Sanders on, right? And I
Yeah.
know I heard a long description of what he went through with the Kamala Harris organization to get her on, right? And he actually offered that before he offered it to President Trump, and they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't get out of their own way. I think the Dems are lost, and I think they haven't figured out what's important to be. Whatever. There's not a political, but anyway. Joe is seen as, he used to say to me, he goes, I'm a libertarian. And I said I did his podcast. And until Elon Musk era, I was like one of the highest, most listened to episodes because we were talking about the old days. It was very fun. He goes, I'm a libertarian. I go, Joe, that means you're a Republican that smokes pot. That's what a libertarian is. So, and maybe that's true with him. But I think first off, Joe Rogan and Jon Stewart, people should remember they're comedians.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're not political commentators, they are entertainers. And so if you're getting, and they provide a wide range of, viewpoints, that's true. But that's different than going to whoever it is you like, Fox News, New York Times, whatever. Everybody's still in the business of clicks. But John Stewart and Joe Rogan are they're comedians, yo. They're comedians. That's how they started their careers. They may have gone beyond that to be cultural commentators, but they started as comedians. I think Joe is very open to any point of view. I think that the much talk of the manosphere and folks like Andrew Tate. To put Joe Rogan in that category is really wrong because I think Joe is actually a very decent person. Some of those misogynist viewpoints he would never entertain. I think he's a family man. I think he's misunderstood by both the left and the right. I think some folks on the far right think he's their champion. He is not. And some folks on the far left think he's some Donald Trump mouthpiece. He's not. But what he is an entertainer. And I think it's bizarre. Chuck, think about this. Like from Reagan on, Ronald Reagan was an actor, right? And
Right.
then, we've seen this change in politics from, George Washington was not an actor. Thomas Jefferson was not an actor. And
Yeah.
now and President Trump was, essentially a game show host or a reality TV star, right?
Well, yeah. Don't forget Jesse Ventura.
Oh, of course, the Minnesota
Yeah.
governor, of course, a wrestler, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes. Yeah.
So we live in an era where fame is currency.
Yeah.
If you have that fame, you can spend it, right? That's your currency.
Mhm.
And so I would say, I think Rogan is really misunderstood. You won't have any more fun with anyone than hanging out with Joe. I mean, I was in the old studio in the one in L.A. before he moved to Texas a couple years ago,
Yeah.
and we're in this studio, and it's like it's like San Francisco fog with the marijuana smoke, right? And it's like it's thick, and they're bringing me what would they had a sponsor, bulletproof coffee that Joe insisted I drink with yak butter, uh,
Mm,
and it was fantastic, by the way, because the coffee is so I don't know. It was so much fun doing that podcast with him, and when I brought him into UFC 11, he had no idea what he was getting into, and then later on entered the jujitsu cult. And jujitsu is a cult, but yeah, I think he's tremendously misunderstood, and I think his motives are maligned. Right, like he wants good things for people.
I'm glad you brought him up and mentioned. I'll just say on my part, when people ask me, "Well, Chuck, how is it? Why did you get started into doing podcasts?" And my answer always, Joe Rogan. And I say, love him or hate him, Rogan. And it's their look, and then my response is exactly what you said. I think he asks great questions. He's on both sides. He wants the truth. He may have his opinions, but I look at him as a comedian. He's not a political commentator, nor is he a neuroscientist. He just has some great ways of looking at things that all of us are curious about, or many of us might be. So,
Yeah, and I think he's a great talker and he's funny.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and you got to give him credit for that. And his success speaks for itself.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And speaking of success, you are very successful. I want to be uh, conscientious of your time. So I'm going to say, Campbell, it- take it away. If you're ready to close out with once again where we can find you after June 12th of 2026, or carry on the conversation because I've got as much time as you want.
No, thank you, Chuck. You're very gracious. It was a lot of fun to talk to you. I really appreciate it. No Rules Podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. It'll be on June 12th. 2 days in advance of the UFC White House, so that should be fun. And Combate Global coming back in mid-July. You can find us on YouTube, Samsung TV. Combate has two 24-hour channels on Samsung TV in the US, one in English and one in Spanish. So anytime, any place, if you've got a Samsung TV, you've already got Combate. So check it out. The shows it's great. It's incredible. Incredible style of MMA. You have been very fun to talk to. Some of your questions, they didn't stump me, but they made me think. So hats off to you on that. There, I think in our business, my new business of podcasting,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that are very shallow, Chuck. And the podcast seems to me, in my long experience doing it, which is like a day, but it seems like a great medium for more in-depth conversations, and you certainly provided a great way for us to have that. So I appreciate you having me on, and hope you listen to mine.
I definitely will. Mr. Campbell McLaren, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Me too. Thanks, amigo.